Good morning and welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. We're learning about the Megillah of Chanukah. We're finishing today the story of Chanukah, which is not actually read in public. There's a Megillah we read in Purim, the Megillah of Esther, but the Megillah of Antiochus, the king, the evil king of Chanukah, is surprisingly not read for various reasons, but some have the custom of reading it, so we are doing it here on our YouTube channel, and today we're going to finish the reading of Megillah Antiochus in order to understand the story the way it was written by the people who actually experienced it. And I'd like to just start off by saying that there's two components to the Chanukah story, which can be a little confusing. You know, in the portions of the Megillah of Chanukah that we've already read, the Megillah of Antiochus, we read about the extraordinary feat of the tiny Maccabean vagabond rebel group. I mean, it was Matisyahu and his 5 sons and a bunch of ragtag fighters who were beating down or chasing off the entire Greek army. It's really crazy. Think about that for a moment. It's crazy to think that a small group of vigilantes were able to fight off the entire firepower of the Greek army. And yet, how do we celebrate this miracle? We celebrate it not by recognizing the victory of the war. We do it by lighting candles. And the question is why? What are we really doing? Why is that? Let's study the Megillah. Let's see what the Megillah has to say and see if we can piece it all together. Okay? So here goes. We spoke about the battle, the great battle that happened where Yehuda the Maccabee died and Yonatan the Maccabee died. Following this, should I go back a little? No. So Yehuda the Maccabee died, right? Also, and Matisyahu, the father, joined the battle. Elazar, sorry, it was Elazar the Maccabee who died under the elephant. He killed the chief general. It was amazing how he got in there to the chief general. And then Bagris, the chief general, was burned in fire. When Antiochus, we said, heard that Bagris, the wicked, and all the captains who were with him were slain, he embarked upon a boat and fled to a distant province, and it came to pass that wherever he landed, they rebelled against him and called him the coward. 67. So they rebelled against him and they called him the coward. Can you imagine? This is Antiochus, the leader of the Syrian Greek Empire. What happened to the Syrian Greeks after? Who conquered them? It must be in the Romans, because the Romans are the ones who destroyed our second temple. So they basically became irrelevant, these guys, after the Maccabees tore down the Syrian Greek Empire. Okay. After these things, the sons of Hashmonai came into the sanctuary, restored the gates, repaired the breaches, and cleansed the hall of the dead and of all its impurity. What's impurity means, like the pig, the swine that they put in there, and the idols. And they saw pure olive oil with which to light the menorah, but they found only one little vessel sealed with the seal of the high priest, and they knew it to be pure. How did they know it was pure? Because it's still sealed with the seal of the high priest. Also, it was partially under the ground. It was like buried. So they knew that it wasn't moved. And it contained but sufficient oil for one day. But the God of heaven, who caused his presence to dwell in the sanctuary, gave his blessings, and it sufficed to light the menorah 8 days. It's amazing. The oil that should have lasted for one day lasted for 8 days. Therefore did the sons of Hashmonai together with the Israelites ordain that these 8 days be ever celebrated as days of joy and feasting, along with the festivals ordained in the Torah. The candles be lit to commemorate the victory they achieved through the God of heaven. So fascinating stuff. Instead of implementing a day of military parades, they implemented a day or days of lighting candles, which seems pretty anticlimactic, a little underwhelming.
They recognize God was with them.
Okay, but you think about it. You're like, imagine you had imagine you had the war of October 7th, right? The war of October 7th, and we managed to neutralize not only the Hamas and the Hezbollah and the Houthis, but also Iran. And imagine we commemorate this victory with candles. It would be a little bit underwhelming. Might be a little bit underwhelming, right? So what's going on over here? Were you going to say something?
I was going to say, over the course of time, it came to be that they used candles. That would be legitimate. 200 years post.
Well, according to the Megillah, which would have been written around that time by the people that were there, this I'm still reading for the Megillah right now. So it seems to be that it wasn't just over the course of time. It says here that the sons of Hashmonai themselves ordained these 8 days of lights. Okay, that it be forbidden to mourn or decree a fast day during these 8 days, except such as may have been established previously and was further ordained to pray and thank God. Only the work in the sanctuary was not prohibited by the Hashmonai and his sons and their brethren. So you were allowed to work in the sanctuary, you couldn't work anywhere else. That day saw the end of the kingdom of Greece. Wow. That day saw the end of the kingdom of Greece, which basically means that the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, were the ones who ended the kingdom of Greece. The Seleucids, exactly. It was only one part of the kingdom of Greece. Fair enough. And so the sons of Hashmonai and their sons after them did rule over Israel from that day till the destruction of the house of God, a period of 206 years. Does anybody know how that happened? How did who destroyed the temple 206 years later and why? Why did the Romans destroy the temple 206 years later? Because the Hasmoneans, these Maccabees from the tribe of, they were Kohanim, they were Levites. These Maccabees were Levites, they became the kings for the next 206 years. At one point, 200 years later, there was a dispute between two brothers of the kingdom. Yochanan and Aristobulus were the two kings at that time, and they were having a fierce battle between themselves, sibling rivalry about who should be the king. So one of them had the genius idea of calling in a Roman general by the name of Pompey to adjudicate in his imitable style. Pompey said, "You're both wrong, I'm taking over." And he tore down the Jewish people from the sovereign rule of the land of Israel and destroyed our temple, which comes to show us that no enemy was able to tear us down. Only we ourselves were able to tear us down. No. Only civil war was able to bring the Jewish people to their knees, but anti-Semitism has never succeeded in bringing Jewish people to their knees. As we think about what's going on in the world today, only in fighting. 1939 to 1945, they came close. They brought us to the brink. They brought us to the brink of extinction. Fair enough, to our knees, but not over the. But okay, let me say this: we've been on the brink of extinction many times, but we've always managed to bounce back. Okay, the only times we were banished from our homeland was only through the this unity of our own people. Yeah. Therefore, do the children of Israel observe these days in the lands of their dispersion as days of feasting and joy for 8 days, beginning with the 25th of Kislev. From that day and evermore, the festival shall not depart from the holy places of Israel, for their Kohanim, Levim, and sages ordained it for themselves and their descendants and pledged to keep it forever. Now, the final verse: may God perform miracles on their behalf, do wonders for us, so that the words of the Torah may be fulfilled, even as it is written, I will show him wonders, even as in the days of thy going forth from the land of Egypt. Amen. May God who performed. That's it. That is the end of the Megillah of Antiochus. And I'd like to go back to my question. So why is it then that we commemorate this miracle not with military parades? We barely make mention of the military victory. Why is it that we acknowledge the victory, the miracle of light, but we don't even acknowledge the miracle of the war? The war was sensational.
But we do. We say it in the...
So we barely mention it in the Al Nisim. But there's no mitzvah practice. You'd think we'd have to wave a sword or something. Imagine if we'd all have a dagger. Like the Sikhs, they walk around with a dagger. That's something. A little commemorative. Yeah,
because at the time it was instituted by the rabbis as a holiday, we didn't have an army.
We did. What do you mean? We had the Maccabees.
It was instituted wasn't instituted as a holiday under at the time of the Mishnah.
Why not?
Okay.
We just mentioned that there was.
Yeah, I know.
The Maccabees themselves instituted as a holiday.
We try to take our souls away. It's more spiritual.
So the answer is, my friends, is that Chanukah is different to every other Jewish holiday. that every other Jewish holiday, the enemy that tried to destroy us was trying to kill our bodies. And on Chanukah, they were not trying to kill our bodies. They were trying to assimilate our souls. Other enemies of Israel were trying to kill the Jews. The Greeks were not trying to kill the Jews. They were trying to kill Judaism. This was not a physical war. It was a spiritual war. For us to celebrate the military victory would be entirely to miss the point. In fact, it would be to buy into the exact dangerous and seductive propaganda, which was the Hellenic Greek agenda. What was their agenda? Their agenda was to drive a wedge between the spirit and the mundane, to drive a wedge between the physical and the spiritual. They were trying to say, spiritual has got nothing to do with physical. The physical world is a world of pleasure and indulgence, and we have to take advantage as much as we can of the pleasures of this world. And don't confuse us with any holy blabber regarding this physical world. That's why they didn't destroy our temple. They did not burn our temple to the ground as the Babylonians did and as the Romans did. When they came into our temple, they just contaminated it because they just wanted us to keep on doing our thing. They just didn't want it to be holy.
And they sold the high priesthood.
Yeah, they said the high priesthood is a political position of power. It's not a holy position, right? That's why they contaminated the oils. They didn't destroy the oils. The Maccabees found plenty oil in the temple. They only found one jar that was untempered. That was not yet violated. That was still pure. The whole entire war was a war of the spirit. It was not a war of the physical. Yes, and manifest in the physical when we refused to comply with their values, and they said, we're going to kill you if you don't comply with our values, right? But that was a consequence. It was not the cause. So those Jews today who talk only about Chanukah as a nationalistic event where we reconquered our land are not only missing the point, but they're actually buying into the entire agenda of the Greeks. That's exactly what the Greeks wanted us to think. They wanted us to think that, yeah, you could even beat us. I mean, as long as you separate the spiritual from the physical, as long as you keep God out of the picture, then they won. And which means that today, if you have a Jewish event, let's talk about a very practical level. If you have a Jewish event, an event of Jewish people getting together, and they have a Chanukah party and they serve treif at the Chanukah party, what does that mean? That means the Greeks won. That's what it means. It means that the Greeks won and the Jews lost, and we are so pathetic that we don't even recognize that we're celebrating the Greek victory over us by eating treif at our Chanukah party. That's how seductive the Greeks were. They were so smart. You know, when you deal with the Romans, you knew the enemy very clearly. The guy with the sword trying to kill you, that's the bad guy, right? But when it came to the Greeks, it was almost impossible to differentiate the friend from the foe, right? The Greeks played with our minds so much that they convinced us that the rabbis were here to brainwash us and that the Greeks were here to elevate us. Exactly. That's how confusing they were. To the point that 2,200 years later, I, as the rabbi in Palm Beach Gardens, have to fight with the Greek culture today to allow me to light the menorah, a kosher menorah, in a kosher event, to do it properly. And they say, no, this is how we do it. And you realize that you're dealing with a situation that the Greeks won. What effectively happened in the Greek, the most dangerous enemy our people have ever faced is not Hamas. Hamas is brutal. Fine, they're brutal and they're sadists and they're masochists and they enjoy dying and they celebrate death and they enjoy raising their children to aspire to kill people. They're a culture, they're a death cult. That's what Hamas is, a death cult. But the Greeks were far, far, far more dangerous. You know, we'll beat Hamas. We'll win. You know, we'll wipe them out. And even those people that say, well, you can't ever beat an ideology, you can. We'll win this war. We'll uproot these guys. There'll be nothing left from them. And they'll be gone, right? And you know, I speak to the soldiers today in Judea and Samaria. They're asking for drones, and they say, look, you know, there's only one reason why there's not an October 7th invasion in Judea and Samaria. There's only one reason, not because they can't do it. They have all the capacities, they have all the know-how, they got the plans, they got the people, they got the they got the weapons, they got everything. The only reason they don't want to do that is because they're afraid of us doing to them what we did to Gaza. I mean, Gaza is effectively just like was sent back to the Stone Age. That's effectively what happened to Gaza. And they actually don't want to just all die and be left with an epitaph, if that. So we're going to be Hamas. We're going to be Hezbollah. We'll even beat Iran. But when it comes to the Greeks, we're still struggling. What the Greeks introduced on Chanukah was the war of assimilation. The Jews began to assimilate, and they didn't even realize that they're assimilating. The Jews reached a point where they could become a rabbi who doesn't believe in God.
We have some of those.
And then the congregants come to the rabbi and they say, "You're such a nice rabbi. And isn't it lovely to have a rabbi that eats bacon with us?" I mean, how does that make sense? Imagine you had a doctor. Imagine you went to a pulmonologist who was a chain smoker. What would you say? Imagine you walked into a pulmonologist, right, your lung doctor, and his office is filled with smoke. What would you think? I mean, like what? Imagine you walked into a lawyer's office and he's got his mugshot on the walls from all the time that he's been in jail, right? What would you do, right? Like, why would you go to a rabbi that violates the Shabbos and violates kosher and doesn't believe in God and doesn't believe that God wrote the Torah? What is this, some entertainment thing? Is this just some sort of a cultural event that we just have some sort of a puppet who's going to call himself a rabbi so they can make us all feel good? That is the victory of the Greeks. Chanukah is a war exclusively about spirituality, nothing else. The military was merely a byproduct of the spiritual victory. For us to experience Chanukah today is not about celebrating something, a victory that happened. The war is still ongoing. We never won this war. We beat the Iranians, and we finished that one. We beat the Romans, and we beat the Babylonians, and we beat pretty much all the other nations that we celebrate the victory over them, the Egyptians. But when it comes to the Greeks, we have not won this war. This war is still in process, and it's today only a small minority of the Jewish people, like then, that are loyalists. Because the majority of Jewish people have, well, maybe today might be a little different, but maybe the majority of Jewish people are somewhere between entirely secular or entirely confused, right? And only a small minority of the Jewish people have clarity, have absolute clarity that they know there's a God, he's the creator of heaven and earth, he gave us the Torah, this is how we live our lives, this is why, this is our why, this is our what, and this is our how. And just like back then, the Maccabees were able to overwhelm the majority. By the way, the Alanistim prayer, we don't even talk about the victory of the Jews over the Greeks. Do you know that? We don't even make mention in the Alanistim prayer of the victory of the Jews over the Greeks. You know that? Let me tell you what it says. Yeah, I'll tell you what it says. It does not mention the Greeks at all because they're entirely irrelevant. Watch this. In the days of Mordechai and Esther, in the days of Matthias, the son of Yochanan the high priest, as many and his sons, when the wicked Hellenic government rose up against your people, Israel, to make them forget your Torah and violate the decrees of your war. But you and your abounding mercy stood by them in the time of their distress. You waged their battles, defended their rights, and avenged the wrong done to them. You delivered the mighty into the hands of the weak. Sounds like the Greeks, right? The many into the hands of the few. Who's that? Now watch this. The impure into the hands of the pure. Who's that? The impure into the hands of the pure. Who's the impure? Greeks are not impure. Gentiles are not impure. Gentiles cannot become impure. Only Jews can become impure. Right? Remember when they a Gentile grave, for example, does not make a person impure. Only a Jewish grave makes a person impure. Only a Jew is able to become holy, can be unholy. So when it says the impure into the hands of the pure, it tells us we're talking about the majority of Jews. We're talking about the Jews, the wicked Jews into the hands of the righteous Jews. And the next one is the wicked into the hands of the righteous. Who's wicked and who's righteous? We're not talking about Gentiles are not wicked because they're not righteous. We're talking about Jews that have lost the way, and the wanton sinners into the hands of those who occupy themselves with the Torah. Who's that talking about? It's talking about Jews, which tells you that the first part of the sentence, the mighty into the hands of the few, weak and the many into the hands of the few, is talking not about the Greeks, it's talking about all the same groups of people. It's talking about the majority of Jews who had Hellenized, who had assimilated, who were delivered into the hands of the minority who remained loyal. And therefore, you'll notice that there's actually not a reference to the Greek battle, the victory of the Greeks, because the battle was within the Jewish nation itself. And the message here is that just like then, say in those days and these days, in those days, the Jewish people could have easily said, there's no hope, guys. Imagine they had a projection meeting, like a board meeting of the Maccabees, right? They sat around the table. How many people here? 6 people, 5 sons and Matisi. Okay, we're 6. How many of them are there? We can't even count. There's like endless amount of Jews that have assimilated, right? And they're the high priesthood, they're the king, all the most powerful positions in the land. Everything is, we're just 6 people around this table. They could have said, listen, guys, we're going into hiding. It's all over. They didn't do that. You know what they said? They said, we're going to put one foot in front of the other and we're going to fight this battle all the way to the finish. That's what they said. They said, we're going to try. We're not going to go in projections. We're not going to do actuarial studies. We're not going to do odds. We're not going to do over-under bets. We're going to do what we have to do, and God will bless our actions. And that's exactly what happened. They experienced success beyond their wildest dreams and imaginations. Just like then, the overwhelming majority of Jews who had lost their way fell into the hands of the minority of Jews who had clarity and courage. So too today. The overwhelming majority of Jews who are totally confused, groping in the darkness, will ultimately buy into the values of the Jews of clarity and conscience. And if we couldn't do it ourselves, then Hamas and Hezbollah comes to our aid. Then it's terrorists in Australia and other places that cause the Jews to become more Jewish. Let's face it, right? I mean, I'm not endorsing them. I'm not saying that they did anything positive, God forbid. But as a byproduct of their heinous crimes, as a byproduct of their utter shameless evil, Jews are becoming more aware. This is what happens. Jews become more conscious. And this is the story of Chanukah. It's not a story of the ancient past. It's a story of the present. And we need to fight this battle. We all are Maccabees, friends. We are Maccabees. If you're here, if you're watching this video, it means that we are the fighters in the battle. And the first thing you need to know in the battle is that you're in a war. Because if you don't even know that you're in a war zone, then how on earth are you going to win? Right? You need to know that you're in a battle. You need to know who sent you. That God Almighty himself has sent us to this battlefield. Nobody else is going to be able to vanquish us. He has won every war that he has fought in the past since the day of creation. God will win this battle too. Our job is to be fearless. Our job is to put one foot in front of the other. Our job is to do another mitzvah, to shine another light, not to be intimidated, but to double down in our efforts, to put up an extra mezuzah, not to take down a mezuzah, to wear a yarmulke more, not less, to shine your light stronger, brighter, bigger, and bolder. And when we do that, like the Maccabees who experienced the miracle of the oil that burned 8 times longer than ever expected, our efforts will project 8 times and many times more than ever expected. Our influence and our power will grow beyond our wildest dreams and expectations, to the point that even our enemies will be able to recognize what we recognize, as the prophet Isaiah tells us, and it shall be in that day that the name of God will be one, and the name of God will be one, and God will be one. It says, and all the nations of the land shall see that the mouth of God has spoken, and then the nations of the land are going to come to us. These Jews, they're going to come to us. They're going to say, listen, you, Steve, you knew all along. All along you knew the truth while we were groping in the darkness. Why didn't you tell me about it? That's going to be an interesting conversation. Happy Chanukah, everybody. Have a great day. Chag Sameach.